In 1200 C, Angkor was the world's largest city, 750,000 people living in temples, palaces, and gardens, spanning 1,000 square kilometers. By 1600, it was gone. Not destroyed. Forgotten. In 1200 C, Angkor was not a city. It was a civilization made visible. Spreading across 1,000 square kilometers, larger than modern Los Angeles, Angkor housed roughly 750,000 people. That made it bigger than London, bigger than Paris, bigger than any European city of its time. Most of the world didn't know it existed. The city was built on water, not beside it. The Khmer engineered a system of reservoirs called barrays, massive artificial lakes connected by canals, dikes, and channels that stretched for miles. The largest, the western barray, measured 8 kilometers long. These weren't decoration. They stored monsoon rains, fed rice paddies, provided fish, and transported goods. They were survival made concrete. At the center stood Angkor Wat, the temple complex begun around 1113 CE under King Suryavarman II. Its 5 towers rose 65 meters. The walls stretched 6 kilometers. Inside, galleries held bas-reliefs depicting Hindu cosmology, gods and demons, kings and soldiers, the churning of the ocean of milk. Tens of thousands of workers carved those stones. Tens of thousands more built the city around it. Angkor was not a single downtown surrounded by suburbs. It was dispersed. Temples, palaces, and residential compounds scattered through forest and farmland. Monasteries, markets, reservoirs, gardens. The infrastructure was invisible at ground level, designed to work with jungle, not against it. Stone causeways connected the scattered districts. Drainage systems kept the city dry during monsoons, livable during droughts. The population worked. They farmed, traded, built, carved, prayed. They paid taxes in rice and labor. They lived under a king who claimed descent from Shiva. For over 400 years, this system held. It fed 3 harvests per year. It sustained a bureaucracy, an army, and the endless expansion of temples. Then, around 1350, something shifted. The monsoons began to fail. The city had been built on a gamble with water. Between 1100 and 1300 CE, the Khmer engineered one of history's most ambitious hydraulic systems, reservoirs called barrays, channels, and infiltration tanks that covered nearly 1,000 square kilometers. This was not decoration. It was survival. The monsoon rains came predictably from May to October. The system captured them, stored them, released them across dry seasons. It allowed 3 harvests per year. It fed 750,000 people. Then the gamble failed. Climate records show that around 1350, the monsoon patterns shifted. Rainfall became erratic. Some years arrived heavy, others brought drought. The system could absorb occasional failure, but sustained uncertainty broke it. In 1400, the reservoirs began to silt. This was not sudden. It was slow, particles of earth and stone clogging channels, reducing storage capacity year by year. Maintenance required constant labor, constant coordination, constant will. Those things were fracturing. Political power in Angkor had weakened. The court fragmented. Regional strongmen emerged. By 1420, the central authority that had sustained the water system for 300 years no longer existed in any meaningful form. Without unified management, without resources, without the political consensus that irrigation demanded, the reservoirs failed faster. Fields flooded unpredictably or dried. Harvests collapsed. Population pressure became unbearable. Some residents left. Others stayed, watching the system that had built their world slowly transform into an enemy. By 1450, something had already become clear to the people remaining in Angkor. The city was no longer viable. But they did not yet understand that they were witnessing the final 3 decades before complete abandonment. Between 1350 and 1600 CE, Angkor did not fall. It emptied. The process was slow enough that no one left a chronicle of it, which itself is the mystery. By 1365, the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya had begun raiding the Khmer territories. These were not conquest invasions. They were systematic incursions that destabilized trade routes and fragmented political authority. Meanwhile, the climate was shifting. Monsoon failures between 1390 and 1410 CE reduced water flow to Angkor's reservoir system. The barrays that had sustained 750,000 people for 3 centuries. Without monsoon rains, the hydraulic network that was the city's circulatory system began to fail. Silting accumulated in channels that required constant maintenance. The labor force needed to dredge and repair simply wasn't there anymore. By 1430, the evidence suggests the royal court had relocated south to Phnom Penh, closer to the Mekong Delta and more defensible against Thai pressure. This wasn't a catastrophic evacuation. It was an administrative retreat. But without the court, the incentive to maintain the barrays evaporated. Without maintained reservoirs, agriculture collapsed. Without agriculture, the urban population had no reason to stay. The exodus that followed was not recorded because writing had become a luxury of power, and power had already left. Within a generation, the streets fell silent. Within 2 generations, the jungle began its reclamation. By 1500, Angkor was no longer a city. It was a geography of ruins. But here is what remains unexplained. The temples themselves were never systematically destroyed, never buried, never forgotten by stone, which means the people who left understood they might one day return. But the people themselves, where did they go? Between 1350 and 1600, roughly 750,000 residents did not simply vanish. They walked away. They packed what they could carry. They moved south toward Phnom Penh, toward the Tonle Sap, toward survival. Archaeological evidence from this period shows declining occupation layers, not catastrophic collapse. No mass graves. No siege weapons embedded in rubble. The abandonment was gradual, almost orderly, the unwinding of a city that could no longer feed itself. What remained was a wound in the landscape. 1,000 square kilometers of suddenly emptied streets. Reservoirs that no one maintained began to fail within decades. The sophisticated hydraulic system that had sustained 1 million souls required constant labor, constant knowledge passed from engineer to engineer, from generation to generation. By 1400, that knowledge was fragmenting. By 1450, it was gone. The jungle moved in not as invader, but as inheritor, reclaiming the canals and paddy fields within a single human lifetime. The regional memory of Angkor as a living city lasted perhaps 2 centuries after abandonment. By 1700, it had evaporated completely. Local Khmer populations knew temples in the forest. They knew Angkor Wat as a sacred ruin. But the fact that 1 million people had lived there, that Angkor had been larger than London, larger than Paris, that knowledge had simply ceased to exist. It was not suppressed. It was not forgotten in the traditional sense. It was replaced by silence so complete that when Portuguese traders first reported the ruins in the 1580s, their accounts were treated as fantasy. European scholars dismissed them for nearly 3 centuries. The city had to be rediscovered by people who had never known it existed in the first place. What remains of Angkor today is almost everything and almost nothing. The temples survived. Angkor Wat itself, that vast mandala of stone consecrated around 1150 CE, still stands largely intact. 5 million individual stone blocks, fitted without mortar, outlasting the city that built it by 400 years. Archaeologists have mapped reservoirs using LiDAR technology, airborne lasers that pierce jungle canopy, revealing the skeleton of the water system that once sustained 3 harvests a year. The barrays are still there, massive rectangular lakes dug by hand, their embankments traced by vegetation patterns invisible to the naked eye. But the people, their houses were wood. Their streets are now root systems. No mass graves have been found. No flood deposits mark sudden catastrophe. The abandonment was not dramatic. It was a slow forgetting, family by family, as the monsoons failed and the soil salinized, and the engineering that held back chaos simply ceased to hold. What scholars have recovered comes from 3 sources: the stone reliefs themselves, carvings of daily life, markets, military campaigns, faces of nobles whose names are lost; census data from Chinese envoy Zhu Daguan, who visited in 1296 and counted the population at its height; and in the 1990s and 2000s, pollen cores from lake sediments showing the moment the forest returned, around 1350 to 1450, when rice cultivation stopped and wild vegetation exploded across the fields. The data speaks. The people do not. What was learned is structural. Civilizations do not end only in fire. They end in silence, in institutional collapse, in the failure of systems so specialized, so dependent on perfect synchronization of labor and water and politics, that when one element fractures, the whole becomes uninhabitable within a lifetime. But one mystery remains unsolved, and it may be the deepest, the 1,000 cubic kilometers of water that once filled Angkor's reservoirs. Where exactly did it go, and could it return? Angkor didn't fall to conquest or catastrophe. It collapsed under the weight of its own infrastructure, abandoned so completely that within generations, no one remembered it had ever existed. Another file is already open: the mystery of Cahokia, North America's vanished metropolis. If you want to uncover more lost civilizations before history forgets them again, subscribe to the archive.